Hey everyone, Daniel with HRT, and today I'm going to take you down a potentially oppressive rabbit hole about the Colt M45A1, or the Marine Corps' CQB pistol. And most of this is just a review. This is kind of just for fun. I now have just gotten to 3,500 rounds through this gun in having it for about 11 months now, and kind of just want to talk about some of my experiences with that and kind of give you some cool shots of maybe this gun here. So if you're not familiar with Colt, I don't know where you've been, but Colt has been around since the early 1800s. Samuel Colt himself was born in 1814 and was kind of around for a lot of the very early parts of American history. So a lot of the westward expansion and then even the early part of the Civil War he was around for, and a lot of his inventions impacted that immediate time and were kind of tailored towards the flow of history at that time. And then he actually died in 1862 in the middle of the Civil War, but his designs would go on to affect the next 20, 30 years of firearm development from that point on, and then as well as kind of the legacy of the company continuing to grow. Colt himself was an inventor and entertainer, a ship's mate, all kinds of various things throughout his life, and eventually his goal was to become an inventor for firearms. And he did an excellent job of marketing himself and his company, and if you kind of get bored and want to go down that rabbit hole, definitely check that out. It's very interesting to see the marketing and the influencing that he did back in the 1800s and kind of compare and contrast it to how we do that stuff today. He was a mastermind at getting some of those connections and kind of weaseling his way in at times to various deals. So that's an overview of Colt. You're probably familiar with the M1911, which we have one here. And you're hopefully familiar with the Single Action Army, the 1873. These are all things that come from their history. Colt also made a ton of M16s and various other products for both the US and foreign entities for decades, and still do. So as far as the M1911 goes, I know we all make fun of it and we pick on it at times compared to things like Glocks and such. But without the 1911 system, we probably would never be where we are today as far as firearms design goes, and a lot was learned from this platform. And if you get into that kind of rabbit hole, definitely check out the 1911 pistol trials and see some of the other things that were considered and how they fared. It's very interesting to see in an era where we did not have or understand metallurgy the way that we do today, how they crafted a lot of these things by hand, the work that went into them being much different than today. So very interesting setup. The one that won the contract ended up doing 6,000 rounds without being cleaned, just got shot like that. The only parts breakage was something incredibly minor that wasn't even a necessary part, if I remember correctly. I think the grip screw backed out was the thing. You don't need a grip screw, so that's okay. Compared to the other guns at the time that were barely able to make it for 1,000 rounds without having a major parts breakage. So it's a very interesting design that did a lot of forward movement in the firearm space. And of course, our hero John Moses Browning designed that, so it should be pretty innovative considering all the things that he's made. So that's where this came from. The Marine Corps had their 1911s from post-World War II. In the 45 time frame, they stopped making the 1911 frame. So government procurement takes forever, and if you want to modernize something, that takes forever. And the Marines, specifically in the MU program, wanted to have a nicer 1911, especially because their guys were shooting a lot. The reports say that these guys would be running 80,000 rounds in a deployment workup and the actual deployment itself. And when you factor that into one of these older guns that doesn't have the same metallurgy and hardening and such that we know of today, they're not going to make it very long. And a lot of those guns had 500,000 rounds in the frames, according to all their paperwork. So the Marine Corps systems started looking at producing a newer gun that could be a little bit better than some of these old ones. And they mismatched a bunch of parts, and the guys at Quantico made a bunch of cool designs and stuff. And this is kind of a replica of one of those, not a real one, but this is a Springfield slide on a Springfield frame, but this is kind of the idea of what was happening to those guns. They'd take the old GI frames, pair them with maybe a new slide, better sights, better grip safeties and beaver tails and such, the Pacmar grips, the classic, Videcki 3-hole trigger, things like that, make them modernized guns. The problem is now we're getting into maybe the late 90s, early 2000s, and these guns are getting worn out too. And so now the Marine Corps goes, we need another gun. And we still want a 45, and we still want it to be around this pattern mag, but these are just getting old for us now too. So in 2010, the Marine Corps went out and made a bulletin saying they wanted a new pistol, and Springfield, Colt, and Kimber had a solution, and then this guy named Carl Lippard had one. And if you are really interested in this weird history, check out Carl Lippard's pistol. He holds a bunch of world record shots with handguns and has some incredibly accurate pistols, and I think the reason his was thrown out was it was just too expensive. But it was a very interesting design. So around 2012, the Marine Corps settled on these, which is the Colt M45A1. The A1 changed slightly from the original model. They beefed up this 1913 rail, and then those went out. Now, unfortunately, they didn't last very long. The Marine Corps decided to change over to Glock 19s around 2016. So these went into all the armories. I think there was like 12,000 of them, but they didn't stay there very long. Most of them got sent back to Colt for refurbishment and such, and never really stayed in the fleet very long. Those guns now, their value's off the charts. They're incredibly hard to find, or they're incredibly expensive when you do find them. So those kind of failed in the Marine Corps side. I've heard reports of them being inaccurate, but I've also heard a lot of the official documentation states that it was because they wanted to switch to 9mm, and everybody else in SOCOM is using 9mm, so they switched over. So that said, I never had one, so I can't really state whether it was accurate or not, or reliable or not, but there's some conflicting reports there. Also, the Cerakote was coming off these guns, and if you've watched maybe Grand Thumb's review, he talks about that. Allegedly, the person who did the application was not Colt, it was another company. Colt doesn't use them anymore, so that should tell you something about their application process. The new one, and you see this one here, has this new finish. They call it a Deco Bond. It's essentially a DLC coating, and it is incredibly durable. We'll talk about that here in a minute. So this is the civilian model. This is not a government gun, and you can see that they've changed the lettering on the slides. So the normal one would have USMC written on it. These, they were not allowed to do that because it's a licensed name. So they had to stick to the Colt and then M45 designation, so that's why they did that. The 3 stars there is because of the 3-star general who headed up the program for the M45. So that's an interesting little piece. And then all the serial numbers do have EGA in them as a little throwback to the Marine Corps side. Now, if we want to work on this actual review from tip to butt, because again, that's the standard in our industry, this does have a 5-inch national match barrel with a bushing fit on there. And then they put on Novak sights up top here, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Front and rear cocking serrations, and then this really fancy, nice rail that you can put whatever you want on the front there. In this case, I've put Mod Light PL350 on there. Just, I like the throw of it. I like the switches, and especially when we're talking about how low this beefy rail is. This switch is a lot easier to activate than some of the X300s and such that you'll normally see on these. So I like this setup. It also allows me to put it into a Filster floodlight holster if I was to carry this. A lot easier than some of the other options. That rail really gets in the way on most holsters. This is a Series 80 gun, so there's a firing pin block up here that prevents firing during drop safety. If I was to drop the gun muzzle down, the firing pin would not be able to strike this chambered round because it has that firing pin block. It does make your trigger a little bit heavier though. And then we have our nice beaver tail back here, and there is an ambidextrous safety here, so I have that on both sides, and then my grip safety as well. And the really nice VZ grips here, which I've really enjoyed those. So at its core, it's essentially a slightly beefed up 1911, and it has a couple of the more user-friendly upgrades. They did not serrate or check or anything on the front strap, so I did put on some grip tape there. It's the skateboard tape. That really improved shooting of the gun. And one of the other nice features they did here is they scalloped this area where your middle finger would go underneath when you're holding onto the grip, and that allows you to get a little bit higher on the gun, which gives what's already a fairly low bore axis a little bit of an edge there. So this gun's incredibly accurate, and in my personal use for it, I did carry it for about 10 months while I was having some work done on my other everyday carry piece. So this went around with me pretty much everywhere. I shot it a ton just because it was new, it was exciting. I was super pumped to get it. These are incredibly difficult to find, and I met the right people at Colt who gave me a pretty nice hookup. So I did pay for this gun, but I did pay less than maybe MSRP. I was honestly pretty shocked because they removed it from their catalog, and they did get this one done for me last year in May. So that's pretty cool. Now, like I said, we do have 3,500 rounds in this gun, and I've been keeping track of it in one of these little old Marine Corps weapons logbooks, just kind of to pair with the gun for the entertainment value. Inside of this book, I have kept all of my spring changes and round counts and things like that that's in there. I'll continue to update that. There's a lot of pages in here, so we'll see how high it gets, but I've been maintaining any type of issues in here as well, and any service that's been done to the gun. So in 3,500 rounds, this gun has had 3 cleanings. The most recent one was simply because I got the gun entirely covered in mud, so just to make sure I wasn't having any issues, I cleaned it up. In that time frame, it's had 1 set of spring changes, and that's been the only maintenance done to the gun. The Colt M45 ships with the dual recoil springs that you'll see in like the 10mm Delta Elites and things like that. It's 2 springs. One of them has a smaller diameter than the other one. They're paired together, similar to what you have in maybe a Glock, where there's an outer and an inner spring. It's supposed to dampen out and smooth the recoil. It worked great until about 3,000 rounds, and then for some reason it stopped really doing its job. So I just noticed I was at the range. I was planning on changing them at 5,000, and I was getting my hand beat up. And 45 recoil is not that aggressive, but my wrist was hurting after 2-3 mags, and I thought that was a little bit unusual. But I wrote it off as me, so I just kept shooting the gun and thought, well, maybe I'm just weak or hurt myself or something. And then I took the springs out and checked them, and I swapped them out for a new set, and the gun is entirely different. So the spring failed early. They're supposed to go more than 5,000 with that dual set. This one did fail earlier than it should have. So we'll get into some of the maintenance things, but that is something to keep in mind on this style of gun, or even some of the larger caliber handguns. When you have spring changes, keep on those intervals because it'll really change how the gun works. Now, I did also do the 10.8 performance tests on feeding and extraction. So if you are doing anything with 1911s or 2011s, I would encourage you to check out that test. It's a great way to determine whether your gun is worth carrying or not, or if it needs some work to maintain that peak level of maintenance. This one passed all the tests with flying colors when I got it, which is kind of unusual for a production gun. Normally they need a little bit of work. But now the extractor has started to lose some of its tension in the 3,500 rounds here. So it is still passing, like the round is exiting the gun, but they're not doing it in the manner that they should be. If you look up this test, it's with no magazine. The magazine assists when the round kicks out of the gun. So I've noticed my ejection pattern has changed. It's been 3,500 rounds. That's something that you should normally be checking tension on around 4,000 to 5,000 rounds. So I wouldn't say we're off schedule. Once again, you can laugh at me, but you don't have to do these things with Glocks. I get that. This is a different platform than a Glock. So if you're carrying a Glock, no one cares about your ejection pattern. If you're running one of these, it's a little bit more important. It tells you it's like getting the heartbeat of the gun. You know some things that are happening on the inside based on that. My biggest complaint with the entire thing, I haven't had any issues anywhere. I've had no trouble feeding hollow points. I've had no trouble feeding ammunition except for one mag, which is from 1989. So we'll give that one a pass. All the new mags or even a couple-year-old mags, I have no issues with that. This front sight, full of carbon. Around 1,500 to 2,000 rounds. The tritium violets on the inside, can't even find it. I've tried Paragon, I've tried different types of cleaners and stuff to get down to that. There should be a white ring with a tritium violet inside. Can't see it at all, it's just black at this point. So that is my one frustration, especially because this gun has been so accurate. I'm kind of bothered that I have to either go get a new front sight or it's just gonna be a black sight. Not there's anything wrong with having a blacked out front, but when you have 2 white vials here in the back and a black one up front, it's kind of counterintuitive for what I'm used to. So that's going to be one downside I experienced. I don't know if that's going to be normal for everyone, but that was my experience. Taking a look at the gun, you can see I have like this one line here that's from my holster. I have a Safari line that I modified to hold this with the ALS. This and just some very slight finish wear around the front is really all that the finish is given. Even on the inside of the gun, there's very little difference in the finish from the day that I got it. I'm very impressed with this finish on this gun. As a side note, since I'm turning around, they did cut a bevel into this mag well, so it is a little bit easier to slide your mags into. It's a nice little feature compared to one like this that's literally just a hole. So good luck reloading that one fast. So this really does help a lot without having to add a mag well to the gun. So those are some of my issues that I've had with it. Like I said, besides those things, this gun has run really, really well. I'm very impressed for a production gun to just be that good right out of the box. For what you pay for it, it should be, but there's a lot of times a mismatch between price and product when you get something like this. So I've been really pleased with this. It's done great for me. I've taken it to a number of events. I've run it at some classes, and it does great. I've used it for some instructing. It's always fun to pull it out, and people are like, "What in the where did that come from?" In the middle of a CHL class, everybody's running smaller guns. Super accurate, especially the National Match barrel in there. We're out at a range that's out in Zanesville. It's called Rainer's Range. Excellent place to go to, especially if you're going to shoot some like precision rifles and such. And they have a setup of plates at 235 yards, and one of them is a 6.5 by 7 plate. And I was out there with another guy that likes these, and we were trying to figure out a good hold to hit that plate with on a fairly windy day. And we eventually found the right balance between where to put the front sight in your rear sight, where we actually got a hit on that plate. It took us about 15 rounds to find the right hold and such, so it's not like we did it right off the bat. It did take some work to fine tune it. But once we found out where it's going, and because the gun is so consistent when it shoots, we were able to hit that plate. There is a video of it. You can find it on my Instagram page. It's posted up there. It's just kind of a little testament to the gun's quality and its accuracy. So if you are interested in 1911s, be it something like this GI1 or maybe something kind of in the middle where it's a little bit of a modernization, or you're going into the 2011s, or maybe building your own or whatever the case might be. Some things to keep in mind are it's not going to be like your modern polymer guns that have springs that go for 20,000 rounds. Your Glock, you may have never changed that spring in your entire life. I would encourage you to change it, but you may make it to a point where you don't care. These are a little bit more sensitive to things like that. So extractor tuning, your springs, and then you have a hammer spring that goes down in the mainspring section here. That's going to power your actual hammer here. So those things are really important to keep tabs on. Make sure you've got some type of idea, and then make sure that you keep checking on the gun periodically just to make sure you're doing everything right. These will want a little bit more oil than your Glocks will and things like that. So biggest thing is just going to be springs and oil. I have run these all dry, just kind of get a feel for them. They run fine. I've run this one covered in mud, and they do all right, but just things that you want to keep in mind to have your gun in tip-top shape. There's nothing inherently wrong with the platform. There are things that are more modern. I like how this series has kind of upgraded. Like you now have rails. You can put optics on here and things like that. These are great to cut for optics. And you have really nice triggers. Even though this is the 80 series trigger with a frying pan block, it still does have a really nice trigger. So we'll go ahead and show you guns clear here. And if I depress this grip safety here, I find this first wall here, and then the hammer drops. So it's a very simple trigger when I've got all my safeties off, very light, good break, very accurate gun. Again, 3,500 rounds. My only issues have been one mag from the 80s that didn't like this gun, and just some cosmetic issues that I'm not a huge fan of. Spring changes. The spring wore out a little bit sooner than I thought it would based on their advertising, but otherwise it kind of held together, and it did fine shooting, and just a little bit more recoil than I was really expecting. So this has been a fun piece for me. I like the historical side of it. I had some time in the Marine Corps, and this is something that I always enjoyed seeing floating around in armories and things. Bummed I never got issued one, but wrong place, wrong time. I get to at least play with this one here. So if these are of interest to you, check some of these out on maybe Colt's website. You'll see me using mine at various events. If you come to an HRT event, you might see me using it. Just keep an eye out for them. If this interests you, go to the right places, seek the right training. They're a little bit different than some of your other more modern guns. So just make sure you're getting the right training for it, and the right gear as well will really change how the gun feels for you. So thanks for checking out this video. Sorry it ran a little bit long. If you're interested in this, great. If you're not, that's fine too. We have a bunch of other things on some more modern products we'll bring to you as well. So thanks for checking out the video, and check us out at hrttacticalgear.com.